I never learned to read proper. Sounds like a small thing to say, but when you're 41 and the only book you've ever finished is a woman's diary you found frozen to the floor of a dead man's wagon, it stops being small. I couldn't have told you her name that first night. I couldn't have told you if she was living or gone. What I could tell you was that whoever she was, she'd pressed the pencil so hard into the last page that it tore the paper. And something about that torn line made me get up off the ground in the middle of a January storm and start walking toward a woman I'd never met. This is the story of how I read her before I found her, and how, page by page, a stranger I'd never spoken to became the only person on earth I couldn't stand to lose. Her name was in there. So was the man who saved her, the one everybody in that valley would have told me to fear. So was the thing she did, the choice, that I still can't decide was mercy or madness. I'm going to tell it the way I found it, out of order, in pieces, the way the truth usually comes. Stay with me. The horse smelled it before I did. Cash, that's my gelding, a bad-tempered roan I bought off a drunk for $11 and never regretted, planted all 4 legs, and refused the ridge like there was a snake in the snow. There wasn't. There was just the wind coming sideways off the Chiricahuas, carrying that particular cold that gets into the seams of a man and unstitches him from the inside. I'd been 3 days out of Bowie, running a line on cattle that had drifted in the last storm, and I hadn't found a single cow. What I'd found was weather, the kind that kills quiet men who think they're smarter than it. Easy, I told Cash, though I didn't feel easy. I never do. That's my trouble. I feel everything twice, once when it happens and once again later at night when I can't sleep and my own head plays it back to me like a fiddle player who only knows sad songs. My mother used to say I was born with the skin off. Everybody else grew a hide. I just kept bleeding. I got down and led him by the cheek strap up the last of the rise, and that's when I saw the shape. A wagon. Down in the wash, canted over on a busted axle, the canvas top half torn away and flapping like a hurt bird. Snow had drifted up one side of it clear to the wheel hub. It had been there a while. Days, maybe. Nobody had come for it. Now I want to tell you I went down there out of Christian charity. The truth is I went down there because I was cold and I hoped there'd be something to burn. I hobbled Cash in the lee of a juniper and half slid down into the wash. The wind dropped the second I got below the lip of it, and in that sudden hush I could hear my own breath, ragged, and the flap, flap, flap of that canvas and something else. A creak, the wagon shifting on its broken wheel. I called out, "Hello, the wagon." Nothing, I hadn't expected anything. The tongue was snapped clean off. That's what killed it. The team must have spooked and torn loose, and there were no animals, no bodies I could see, no fire ring. Whoever'd been driving had either walked out or been carried out. I told myself walked out. It's easier to keep moving if you tell yourself the kind stories. I climbed up onto the wheel and pushed through the torn canvas into the bed. Cold in there, colder somehow than outside, the way a church is colder than a barn. There was a woman's whole life packed in that wagon and abandoned. A trunk, lid thrown back, dresses gone stiff with frost. A cracked wash basin. A rocking chair of all the fool things to haul across the territory, lashed to the ribs of the frame. A tin of coffee. A child's shoe, just the one, small, buttoned, and I stared at that shoe a good long while and made myself stop thinking about it. And a book. It had slid down against the low side of the bed, and a skin of ice had grown over it, gluing it to the boards. Leather cover, worn, soft, a ribbon marking a place. I worked it loose with my knife, careful, and the ice cracked off in a sheet, and I turned it over in my raw hands. I opened it to the ribbon. And here's where I have to tell you the shameful part, the part I've never told a living soul. I couldn't read it. Oh, I could read some. I knew my letters. I could sound out a brand, a name on a headstone, the words on a wanted poster if I gave it time and nobody was watching me struggle. But a whole page of a woman's hand, close written, the letters all leaning into each other like people sheltering from wind, that was a wall to me. I sat there in the freezing wagon bed with her whole soul open in my lap, and I could not get inside it. I almost put it down. I want you to understand how close I came. My fingers were going numb. The light was failing. Every sensible thing I knew told me to burn the rocking chair, boil some coffee, sleep, and be gone at first light. A book was weight. A book was nothing to a man who couldn't read it. But the ribbon... Somebody had marked a place. Somebody had been coming back to a place. and the pencil at the bottom of that marked page had gone through the paper. I don't know how to explain what that torn line did to me. It was like hearing somebody cry out one room over. You don't have to know the words. The pitch of it goes straight past your ears and grabs you by the breastbone. So I did a thing I hadn't done. Since I was a boy in a schoolhouse, I got pulled out of at 9 to work. I started sounding it out. Out loud, alone. In a dead woman's wagon. I thought she was dead then, with the wind screaming over the lip of the wash and the last gray light coming through the torn canvas. One word at a time, my lips moving like a fool's. Today, Nante. I stopped Nante. That wasn't an English name. I turned it over, kept on. Today Nante brought broth. He does not look at me like I am a thing that is breaking. I read that sentence 4 times. Not because I couldn't get the words, I'd gotten them, but because of what they did to me. A thing that is breaking. Somebody had felt herself breaking and had written it down in a hand so steady you'd never know. I read on slow, cold, but I couldn't stop now. She'd been sick. That much I pieced together over the next hour as the dark came down, and I lit a stub of her own candle I found in the trunk. I know, burning a dead woman's candle to read her diary. There's a special corner of hell got my name whittled on the door. But I read. She'd been sick with a fever after the wagon broke. The other people in her party, there'd been a party, I gathered, 3 families out of Missouri, had waited 2 days and then, God help them, they'd made the choice that people make. They couldn't wait longer. The snow was coming. She was too sick to move, and there was no room in the other wagons, and every day they lost was a day closer to all of them dying in the pass. So they left her. They left her a wagon, a little food, a little wood, and they left her, and they told her she wrote this down, and I read it by candlelight with my jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. They told her that if the fever broke, she was to follow their tracks, and God willing they'd meet again in Tucson. Her tracks were 3 days gone under snow before she could even sit up. I set the book down on my knee. You have to understand something about me and about that country in that year. There were things you knew the way you knew the sun came up. You knew the Apache were the enemy. You knew it the way you knew fire was hot. My own uncle had died in a raid down near the Sonata, and I'd grown up on the story of it the way other children grow up on Bible stories, and it had made a shape in me, a hard, cold shape that I never thought to question because you don't question the shape of your own bones. And here was a woman, left to die alone in the snow by her own people, her own kind, the ones who prayed the same prayers and buried their dead the same way. And the man bringing her broth so she wouldn't die had a name like Nante. I turned back a few pages, hunting, sounding it out, going slower where her hand shook. You could see where she'd been strong enough to write clean and where she hadn't, and that told its own story with no words at all. He'd found her on the 2nd day. She'd heard riders and she'd been too weak to be afraid, she wrote, which struck me as the truest thing about fear I ever read, that it's a luxury of the strong. He'd found her burning up with fever in a broke-down wagon, a white woman, alone, and he had every reason in the world to leave her to the winter or worse. He didn't. He built up her fire. He brought a woman from his own people, an older woman, a healer, whose name the diary spelled Dash. And I'll say now I don't know if I spelled it right in my head or if I ever said it right out loud. But I said it as careful as I could, then and always, because it seemed the least I owed her. Dash brought bitter tea and a poultice that stank, the diary said, of something green and alive. And she sat with the fever the way you sit with a fever, which is to say she did the one thing that the woman's own people had decided they couldn't afford to do. She stayed. I read until the candle guttered. The last entries were the ones with the pressed hard pencil, and by the time I got to them, my back had gone stiff and my feet were blocks of wood, and I did not care. The fever had broken. She was mending, and now she faced a thing worse than dying, which is living and having to decide what to do about it. Because she couldn't stay. She knew she couldn't stay, a white woman living among the Apache. In that year in that country, there was no version of that story the world would let be. If a patrol found her, they'd take her back to civilization and pity her and whisper about her the rest of her life. If they found Nante, sheltering a white woman, she understood. She wrote exactly what they would assume and exactly what they would do about it, and she wrote it plain, and it made the hair stand up on my arms. I would be his death, she wrote. My gratitude would be the rope they hang him with. So she had made a plan. She was going to walk out. Follow the old wagon road east alone, back toward Bowie, and she was going to tell anyone who found her that she'd survived alone in the wagon the whole time. She would never speak his name. She would give him the only gift she had left to give, which was to erase him from her own story so that her story couldn't kill him. And Nante, this is the part where the pencil tore the paper. Nante had begged her not to go alone in the storm, had said she wasn't strong enough, had said the road was death. And she had gone anyway, to save him from her. The last line, the torn one, said, "He is standing at the top of the wash as I write this. He has not moved. If I look up again, I will not be able to do it, so I am not going to look up. God forgive me for what my kindness costs him. I am going now." That was it. That was the whole diary. I sat in the dark a long time. I'm not a praying man, not since I was a boy, but I'll tell you I came close that night. Not to any god I could name. Close to her. To a woman I'd never seen, whose face I couldn't picture, who'd walked out into a killing storm to protect the man who saved her, and who might right now be a frozen shape under the snow not 2 miles from where I sat with her whole heart open in my numb hands. Or she might not. That was the thing. The diary ended, but she didn't have to have ended. The storm that killed the road might have passed. She might have made shelter. She might, right now, this minute, be alive and walking and telling her lie to keep a good man breathing. I found her name near the front, finally, where she'd written it on the inside, cover the way you do when a book is new and yours and precious. Property of Miss Adelaide Fenn, if found, please. And there the line stopped, unfinished, because how do you finish that sentence when you're a woman crossing a country that has no place in it for you? If found, please. I closed the book. Outside the wind had dropped. That's the thing about those storms, they scream all night and then, just before dawn, they go dead quiet, like the country's holding its breath to see what it killed. In the quiet I could hear Cash stamping under his juniper. I looked at the torn last page again by the last red thread of candle. He is standing at the top of the wash. He has not moved. And I thought about a man standing in a storm, not moving, watching a woman walk away from him because she loved him too much to be the death of him. I thought about how I'd never in my 41 years had one single person willing to stand in a storm for me, nor one I'd have stood in a storm for, and how that was maybe the loneliest true thing I'd ever known about myself, and how I'd only just now learned it from a book I couldn't hardly read. The candle went out. I sat in the dark with Adelaide Fenn's diary against my chest, and somewhere before the light came up I made the decision. I didn't argue myself into it. There wasn't any arguing. It was just there, the way a fence post is there, solid in the ground. I was going to find her, alive, and take her wherever she wanted to go and keep her secret till I died. Or dead, and see her buried like a Christian and carry her book to whatever people she had left so they'd know she never once, not once, stopped being brave. I didn't know which it would be. That was the hell of it. I'd read her whole life, and I still didn't know the one thing that mattered, which was whether she was still living it. First light came gray through the torn canvas. I put her book inside my coat, against the skin, where it would stay warm and dry. Then I went out to find the road she'd taken. The road tried to kill me before noon. I'll say this for Adelaide Fenn. She had more sand than I did, because she'd walked this on foot and sick. And I had a horse and a full belly of her coffee, and I still near quit twice before the sun was overhead. The old wagon road ran east along the wash, and then climbed out of it into a country of black rock and white drift where the wind had done strange things, scouring some stretches down to bare gravel and piling others chest-deep. Cash floundered. I got off and broke trail ahead of him where I could. My feet went from pain to numbness to that far worse thing, warmth, the lying warmth that means the cold's got you, and I had to stop and beat them back to hurting against a rock. I read while I rested. I couldn't help it. I'd started over from the front, see, sounding it all out, because the more of her I read, the more I felt like I could hear which way she'd have turned at a fork. And that's not a thing I can defend to a sensible man, but it's the truth of how I tracked her. I tracked her half by sign and half by knowing her. She hated the cold but loved the stars. She'd written a whole entry about the stars over the desert being so many and so bright it frightened her, made her feel God had spilled something and never cleaned it up. She was afraid of horses, which is a hard thing on the frontier, and she'd been ashamed of it, and Nante had never once let her see him find it strange. She'd had a daughter. That was the shoe. I found it in an entry 3/4 back, and I had to stop reading and sit down in the snow whether my feet liked it or not. A daughter, 4 years old, named Susanna, dead of the cholera in the second month out of Missouri, buried on the plains under a cairn that Adelaide had built with her own hands because her husband. There it was, she'd had a husband, and her husband had died too, but not of cholera. Her husband had died of a snakebite that shouldn't have killed him, except that he'd been the kind of man who, drunk, had once broken 2 of her fingers for burning the bread. And when the snake got him and the arm swelled black, she had sat and watched, and she wrote this in a hand so small and level it was worse than screaming. She had decided not to hurry. There was the morally heavy thing. There was the choice I still turn over. She didn't kill him. She wanted that understood, writing to nobody, to herself, to God, to me, I suppose, 41 and freezing and reading it a season later. She didn't kill him. She just didn't run for help the way a wife is supposed to. She heated water slow. She couldn't find the good knife. She misremembered where the settlement lay. And by the time help came, it was too late. And everyone said what a tragedy. Poor Mrs. Fenn, and nobody but Adelaide knew that some quiet, cold animal down at the bottom of her had watched her own hands not hurry and had felt, God forgive her, relief. She'd carried that all the way west. A dead child she'd loved and a dead man she'd let die, and no living soul to tell, until a broke axle and a fever dropped her into the care of the one man in the territory who looked at her. She said, like I am not a thing that is breaking. I understood something then, sitting in that snow with my feet screaming. I understood why she walked out into the storm. It wasn't only to save Nante from the hangman, though it was that. It was that Adelaide Fenn had already decided, somewhere in her, that she did not deserve the one gentle thing that had ever happened to her. A woman who lets her husband die and feels relief does not believe she gets to be saved. She'd have found a reason to walk out into that storm even if there'd been no danger to him at all. The danger just gave her permission. I don't know how I knew that. Maybe because I'd been finding reasons to walk out of my own life for 41 years. I got up. My feet were bad now, real bad. But I got up because I'll tell you what I'd decided down in that snow. That whatever Adelaide Fenn thought she deserved, she was wrong, and I was going to catch up to her and tell her so even if I had to crawl the last mile to do it. That's a foolish way to think. A man doesn't get to overrule a woman's whole heart because he read her diary. I knew that even then, but I was past sensible. I'd been past sensible since the candle went out. The sign got better and worse. Better because the drifts held tracks, and I found them, by God, half a day on. A single line of footprints, small, filling with new snow, but there, a woman's boots headed east, one foot dragging a little like she was favoring it. My heart came up into my throat. Days old, but there. She'd made it this far. She'd been walking this far. Worse because a mile on they were joined by another set. Not Apache. I read sign well enough to know a moccasin from a boot heel, and these were boots. 2 men shod horses off to the side. And the 2 sets and the 1 set converged, and where they converged the snow was churned up, and I read that churn like it was the plainest page in her whole book, and every word of it was bad. There'd been a stop, a standing around, and then all the tracks went on together, east, the horses now carrying weight they hadn't before. They'd taken her up, 2 men had taken her up. Now that could be salvation. 2 men finding a half-frozen woman on the wagon road and putting her up on a horse and carrying her to warmth and a fire. That's the kindest reading, and I'm a man who tries for the kind reading. But I'd lived in that country a long time, and I knew what 2 men and shod horses and no other soul for 40 miles could also mean. I knew there were men out here who were worse than any weather. Deserters, road agents, men the war had unmade and never put back together right. And a woman alone. I got back on cash, and I pushed him harder than was fair. I read no more that day. I couldn't. I'd gotten to a place in her story where I was more afraid of her diary than of the cold, because I knew there weren't many pages left, and I'd started to feel, this is the strangest thing I'll tell you, and it's true, I'd started to feel like as long as there were pages left, she was alive. Like the diary and the woman were the same length. Like when I read the last word, she'd stop breathing. Foolish, I know it's foolish. But I rationed her. I read her like she was water and I was crossing a desert and I would not let myself get to the end. That night I couldn't make a fire. Everything was wet and the wind came back, and I lay against Cash's warm side under my blanket and hers, the one from her trunk that still smelled faint of lavender under the smell of frost. And I did not sleep so much as I stopped, the way a clock stops. And I dreamed of her. I'd never seen her face. So in the dream she had no face, just a shape, a woman walking away from me across white ground, one foot dragging, and I ran after her, and the faster I ran the farther she got. And I called out, but here's the thing, in the dream I didn't call Adelaide. I called Miss Fenn. Wait, you got it wrong about yourself. And she didn't turn around, and I woke with my face wet and Cash's ear flicking back at me like he was embarrassed for the both of us. Second day. The tracks led off the wagon road. That scared me worse than anything. As long as they'd been on the road, I could tell myself somebody was taking her to a settlement. But they turned south, into the broken country, toward nothing, toward the kind of place you go when you don't want to be found, and I sat on Cash at that turning for a long minute with my heart going like a drum. And then I saw the smoke. Thin gray a mile off up a side canyon. A fire, somebody's fire. I checked my old pistol, which I'd carried for years and fired maybe 6 times, none of them at a man. My hands weren't steady. I'm not a brave man, I want that on the record. I feel everything twice and fear worst of all. But I thought about a woman who watched her husband die slow and then walked into a storm because she didn't think she deserved to be saved, and I thought, somebody has got to think she deserves it. Somebody has got to at least once and mean it. I got down off Cash a good ways out and went up the canyon on foot, quiet as my ruined feet would let me, pistol in my numb hand, her diary against my chest like a second heart. I could hear voices now. Men's voices, 2 of them low and easy, the easy of men who think they're safe. And I could hear something else under it that took me a second to place, because I'd never in 2 days heard it and had half stopped believing in it. A woman not screaming, talking. Low and steady and calm, the exact same steady I'd read in her steadiest pages. And I knew before I ever saw her face, I knew that it was her, and that she was alive, and that she was doing the thing she did, which was to be level and unbreaking in front of men who could hurt her, and buy herself time with her own held breath. I went up the last of the rocks on my belly, and I looked down into the canyon, and I saw Adelaide Fenn for the first time. She was smaller than I'd built her. That's the first fool thing I thought, lying up in the rocks with my heart slamming, that all the bigness I'd made of her out of her words had a small, cold, tired woman at the center of it, sitting on a rock by a fire with a blanket around her shoulders, and her hands folded in her lap, favoring one foot, her face turned half away. And she was beautiful, and she wasn't in the way real people are and pictures never are. Sharp chin, a scar through one eyebrow, chapped mouth, eyes that went to each of the 2 men in turn, weighing them the way you'd weigh weather. The 2 men were about what I'd feared, not monsters. Worse, ordinary. One older, gray-bearded, cleaning a rifle he didn't need to clean, which is a thing a man does to be holding a rifle. One younger, restless, wearing a dead soldier's coat with the buttons cut off. There was a jug. The younger one kept at it. I lay there and I did the arithmetic a coward does. 2 of them armed, easy in their bodies. One of me half froze, a pistol I couldn't shoot straight, a heart that feels everything twice. If I stood up and demanded she be let go, I'd be dead before I finished the sentence, and then there'd be no one at all who knew Adelaide Fenn was brave. So I didn't stand up. Not yet. I lay in the rocks and I listened, and I learned the shape of the trouble the way I'd learned the shape of her, by holding still and letting it come to me. They hadn't hurt her, not yet. The younger one wanted to. You could hear it in him, in the too loud way he talked, working himself up to a thing. The older one didn't, not out of goodness, I think, but out of that bone-deep laziness some hard men have, wanting the warmth and the jug and no bother. He was the one keeping her alive, minute to minute, without knowing he was doing it, just by wanting his rest more than the younger one wanted his cruelty. And Adelaide was reading them exactly the way I was. I could see it. Every time the younger one leaned toward her, she said something low to the older one, asked about the road, the weather, was there coffee, pulling the older man's attention back, making herself useful, making herself a bother to lose, keeping the lazy one invested against the mean one. She was doing it on purpose. She was fighting for her life with nothing but her voice and her wits, and she was, God help me, winning hour by hour, a fight nobody would ever know she'd fought. And I understood the last thing about her then, the thing the diary hadn't told me because she didn't know it about herself. Adelaide Fenn didn't think she deserved to be saved. But she could not, stop trying to save herself anyway. Her hands did it even when her heart had given up. Same as her hands had built a cairn over her daughter with the strength gone out of her. Same as they'd written clean and level while her life came apart. The wanting to die and the refusing to die lived in the same body, and neither one ever won, and that right there was the bravest thing I ever came to know about a human being. I couldn't watch her fight alone. I want to tell you I made a plan. I didn't. What I did was worse and better than a plan. I stood up, but I didn't stand up like a man come to fight. I stood up slow, in plain sight, hands wide, the pistol left down in the rocks, left it. I don't fully know why, except that I knew if I came up armed the young one would shoot, and I'd have started the exact killing I meant to stop. I came up empty-handed into the firelight like a fool or a ghost. "Evening," I said. I have never in my life heard a silence like that one. The older man had his rifle up before my second word. The younger one was on his feet, hand at his hip, that juglet meanness swinging around to a new target. And Adelaide. Adelaide looked at me and something crossed her face I'll spend the rest of my days trying to name. Not hope. She was past hope, I think, in a working way. It was more like recognition. Like she knew me. Which was impossible, we'd never met, and yet it wasn't impossible at all because I had her whole heart against my chest, and maybe a person can feel that. Maybe a person can feel when someone knows them all the way down. "Easy," I said to all of them and none of them. "I'm alone, lost my stock in the storm, seen your fire." A lie, the kind you tell to buy a minute. "I don't want trouble, I'll trade for coffee and be gone." "Keep walking," the young one said. "He's froze, Cole," the older one said, lazy, wanting no killing that mean burying a body in frozen ground. See, I'd read him right. Let him warm and go. They argued. Men like that always argue. It's the argument that kills people, the long minute where meanness and laziness push against each other. And in that minute I did the only useful thing I did that whole night. I looked at Adelaide and I said, quiet, meant only for her, "You got it wrong about yourself, Miss Fenn." The fire popped. Her whole face came apart. She hadn't told them her name. I saw the older man's head turn, saw him start to wonder how a lost stranger knew a name nobody'd said. And Adelaide understood in one heartbeat everything it meant, that I knew her, that I'd read her, that somewhere out in the white her wagon and her book had been found, that her secret and Nante's secret were both of them known to this ragged half-froze man standing empty-handed by a killer's fire. And I watched her decide to trust me with a speed that broke my heart, because it meant she was that starved, that alone, that one true sentence from a stranger was enough. What happened next happened fast, and I've never been able to slow it down in my memory, no matter how many nights I've tried. The young one, Cole, went for his gun, not at me, at the confusion, at the way the older man had turned his head, at his own drunk certainty that something was slipping. And Adelaide, who was afraid of horses and afraid of the dark and afraid, she'd written, of almost everything. Adelaide came up off that rock with the blanket in both hands and threw it over his gun arm as it cleared leather, and the shot went into the dirt, and I was already moving. I'm not a fighter, I've said it, but I'm 41 and I've thrown a lot of steers, and there's a thing your body knows that your head never learns, and my body took Cole around the middle and put him into the rocks, and the two of us went down in a tangle. He was younger and meaner, but he was drunk, and I was desperate, and desperate lasts longer than mean. The older man, I'll never know to this day why he didn't shoot me where I rolled. Maybe he was tired. Maybe some last ember of a man he'd used to be looked at a woman throwing a blanket to save a stranger and couldn't put a bullet in it. Maybe he just didn't want to dig a grave. He stood there with his rifle half up while Cole and I fought in the dirt, and he let it decide itself. And it decided when I got Cole's own knife out of his own belt and put it against him, and Cole, sober all at once, went still. "Enough," the older man said, just that. "Enough, Cole ain't worth it." And it was over. They rode out an hour before dawn. I made them leave a horse, Adelaide's, they'd been going to sell it, and I made them leave the food, and I stood there in the cold holding Cole's knife while they saddled up, my hand shaking so bad I could hardly hold it, terrified the whole time they'd change their minds. But men like that, once the wanting goes out of them, they just want to be somewhere else. They rode out. The lazy one nodded at me, almost respectful, like we'd concluded a piece of business. The mean one wouldn't look at me. And then they were gone into the dark, and it was just the two of us and the fire and the enormous, ringing quiet. I couldn't look at her. Isn't that something? After all of it, I couldn't look at her. "You read my diary?" she said. "Yes, ma'am." "All of it?" "Yes, ma'am." I couldn't read it fast. I ain't a good reader. Took me 2 days. I'm sorry. I know it wasn't mine to. "How much?" I made myself look at her then. She was standing very straight, The way she'd have stood in front of a judge, ready to be condemned for the thing she'd let happen in Missouri, for the relief she'd felt for all of it, and I understood she was asking whether I knew the worst of her. All of it, I said again. The husband, the not hurrying. I watched her flinch and go on standing. And your girl, Susanna, and the fever and Dash's tea and Nante standing up on the wash not moving while you walked out on him to keep him from the rope. My voice went out from under me. I got it back. I read all of it, Miss Fenn, every page. And I want you to hear me say I rode 2 days through that storm to find you. And I'd have rode 2 more, because I have never in my life read anything braver. And you got it wrong about yourself. And I couldn't stand for you to die out here still believing the wrong thing. She didn't cry. I thought she would. She just sat back down on the rock, slow like her strings were cut, and she looked into the fire for a long time. He wanted me to stay, she said finally, not to me, to the fire, to Nante 100 miles back. I keep thinking I could have stayed, found a way, and then I think what they'd have done to him, and I know I couldn't. And then I think it doesn't matter what I could or couldn't have done, because I'm the kind of woman who watched her husband die, so it was always going to come to a fire in the cold and 2 men and a knife, one way or another. I earned it. No, I said. She looked at me. That's not how it works, I said, and I'm not a preacher and I don't have the words, but I found some. I let a lot of things die, Miss Fenn, not people. But I let every good thing that ever come near me die out of thinking I didn't have it coming. Left every town before anybody could get a good look at me. Feel everything twice and let it all go once. And I want to tell you I read your book and I thought, here's somebody done a thing that can't be forgiven. And she's still the best soul I ever come across. Still throwing a blanket over a gun for a stranger. Still level and brave when there's no one to see it. And if that's true of you, it's got to be true that the doing of a bad thing and the being of a good soul can live in one person. It's got to, or there's no hope for a single one of us. The fire burned down. We didn't talk much after that. There wasn't a need. She let me look at her foot, which was frostbit but would keep. I let her read a page of her own book out loud to me in her own voice, the entry about the stars over the desert being God's spilled thing, and hearing it in her voice after 2 days of my own stumbling was like, I don't have it. It was like water. Come morning, I asked her where she wanted to go. Because that was the thing, see? I could take her to Bowie to the world, to pity and whispers and a lie she'd tell forever. Or. She was quiet a long while. There's a valley, she said. Nante showed me before where his people winter, he said. She stopped. He said the door was open. I didn't believe I could walk through it. I thought I'd be his death. She looked at me. But you found me by my book. 2 men found me by the road. If a lost stranger and 2 road agents can find a woman in 100 miles of empty, then maybe I was never going to keep him safe by dying quietly out here. Maybe the only safe I can give anybody is to stop pretending I'm too broken to be loved and just go be where the door's open. That's the truest thing in the whole book, I said, and it ain't even in it. She almost smiled. I rode with her 3 days, west and south, till we came in sight of the valley she meant, green in a country of brown, smoke standing up peaceful from cook fires. And she got down off her horse and stood looking at it a long time with her hand pressed flat against her own chest like she was holding something in. I didn't go down with her. That world wasn't mine to walk into, and I knew it, and she knew I knew it. Some doors are open for one person and not another. She turned to me. She had her diary in her hands. She held it out. You should keep it, she said. You read it better than anyone ever will. I read it slow, I said. You read it slow, she agreed. That's how you read something you love. I couldn't take it. I closed her hands back around it. It's yours. Write the rest of it, the part that's coming. Somebody down there's going to want to read how it comes out. She looked at me a while longer. Then she did a thing I didn't expect. She took the pencil, the same pencil, I think, that had torn the last page, and she opened the book to the inside cover where she'd written property of Miss Adelaide Fenn. If found, please, and left it unfinished all that way across the country, because how do you finish that sentence? She finished it. She wrote 3 words under the broken line, and she showed it to me. And then she closed the book and got on her horse and rode down toward the open door without looking back, favoring one foot, small and getting smaller, the way she'd walked away from Nante, the way she'd walked away in my dream, except this time she was walking toward something, and this time somebody had told her she had it coming. I sat cash on that ridge a long time after she was gone into the smoke. What she wrote under "if found, please," I'll tell you. But you have to understand it's the last thing. And after it, I turned cash around and rode back east into my own life, which was smaller than hers and always would be. And I never saw Adelaide Fenn again. And I've never wanted to end anything the way I don't want to end this.